Hello and welcome to the GrapeSEED Official Podcast. The This and That series has reclaimed its place on the fours, to use an old radio gimmick. We got off track around episode 100, but here we are on 124 with another Mikolosian episode. I think that's the first time I've used your name on the podcast as an adjective, but welcome to the show, by the way.
Yes, I do like that. I will continue to use the word Mikolosian to describe everything that I do.
Yes, anything long answers, a lot of talking, Mikolosian.
Yes, thank you.
Usually before we record these, I reach out to Miklos and ask what he'd like to talk about. And this week, I'll just let him introduce the topic since he chose it after all.
There's so many things to talk about. There's a never-ending Miklosian cavalcade of things to talk about. But something that's been on my radar, and I think on a lot of people's radar who are listening to this right now, is a constant issue / worry / just topic of conversation around GrapeSEED coaches and teachers at your school, I'm sure, which is teaching the writers. Specifically, there are a couple of issues that come up constantly. How do you teach? How do you do writer time in your lesson in accordance with the time and the lesson plans? So many teachers will often say that, there's just the time in the lesson plans is not realistic. I can't teach writers in that amount of time. So that comes up, as well as some kids, they finish quickly. Sometimes some kids they just won't finish. And so we have to do things to make sure that they finish all the writer assignments, things like that. And so teachers worry about it. And so that's for that reason, I thought we should go into some details on possible solutions. Again, the solutions that we talk about are going to be curriculum delivery based solutions. And so you're going to have to, at times, adapt that to your school environment and to the educational philosophies of your school and the reality of your situation. So we're going to recommend things and then also provide some reminders about what the core objectives of the writers are, just to clarify things in case any teachers out there are in need of that.
I think it's a good place to start because when you first look at a writer, we all have had back in our educational days growing up, whether it's English class or any class, really, we've all had workbooks that we've had to do for school. And those workbooks, usually you have to complete an assignment. It usually ends up being homework, and you get graded on it, and then that score is reflected in your final grade for the term, whether it's a semester or the school year or whatever. So when we first see a GrapeSEED writer, we kind of have all those memories, and then those expectations kind of get imparted onto the GrapeSEED writer, even though in a lot of cases, we're not going for the exact same things that your science book back in the day would have expected you to do. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit.
Yes, and I'd like to also preface this for all teachers and all coaches and anyone who's listening. In preparation to talk about this, I was reviewing a couple of key documents and materials. Specifically, the reason I'm saying this is because after listening to this, I definitely recommend anyone who's teaching writers or involved in preparing and executing the lessons that involve writers to review these things. One is the teacher manual, specifically the beginning section of the teacher manual, the front matter that talks about the 5 platforms on which GrapeSEED is built. And specifically in this case for writers, the language arts section, which goes heavily into the language arts philosophies and components of GrapeSEED and how the writers are a part of that. That's key right there, as well as the video on language arts as a platform in the GrapeSEED training site. So that's one thing. The other is the writer instructions and objectives, just the description of writers as a component later in the front matter that goes through. And it changes depending on the units. Like obviously units 3 through 7 are going to have different instructions than say units 16 through 20. And the last thing that I reviewed for today is specifically in the teacher GrapeSEED portal content site. You should have a document in there that is called the Guidance on Writers. And this is a supplementary document that's been produced by the curriculum developers that goes into details on how you can effectively deliver a fun and effective writer time in each lesson. With that in mind, the first thing I wanted to address is that writers are meant to reinforce speaking and reading skills. So when you're, and most teachers out there remember this on a daily basis, because one of the things that comes up is, I know from the training that the kids are supposed to, like in the early units when they're doing the single letter phonograms, they're supposed to say the sounds when they write, but sometimes I find it really hard to do that. And then later in later units, kids, when they're doing the writers, they should be sounding out the words as they write them and saying what they're writing. And in a lot of the writer activities, you'll notice it's actually, you begin with a conversation. You talk about something and then the kids write about it. There are activities called, speak and write. So, the writers reinforce speaking and reading skills and vice versa. The speaking and reading reinforces your writing. It all goes hand in hand. A lot of teachers, like you mentioned earlier, because of your own experience with doing, reading, writing workbooks, and even in many schools, there's, the drill book where you just, write vocabulary words over and over again, just for, that kind of practice, or penmanship practice and things like that. Of course, handwriting and penmanship is very important. But what comes first is the ability to communicate your thoughts on paper with using a pencil or a pen. And so handwriting and penmanship will develop as kids grow. Like early in the early days of, I'm thinking about my son is in Unit 4. He's 5 years old, and his penmanship is not very good because he's 5 years old. But it's going to get better. But the important thing is that when, like a good parent, I printed out on the parent portal site, I printed out the some extra writing fun pages for him to write in color. And this morning he was doing the H one. He was sitting down. He's really excited to do it. And he was showing me his with his terrible handwriting, but he's pointing to H and showing me that he wrote it down. And I was like, hey, what's that? And he goes like this. And I was so proud. I was like, good job. Yeah, that's an H. He goes, and because he gets, when I asked him what it was, his thought first went to like the sound.
Goodbye, my friends, goodbye. I'm sad to say goodbye. It was a good day, but now I will say goodbye, my friends, goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.